this tweet in, or X as it's now called, from Vic. She says, it's happened to me so many times in my DMs, people sending me unsolicited, explicit images. You then proceed to report and block them, but nothing happens to them. One time I shared it on my timeline, tagging him with his privates covered. And then I got a 48-hour ban from the social media company because I was accused of targeting him and harassing him. How on earth does that happen? You ask me. I tell you, social media companies have a hell of a lot to answer for. Ronnie, a first-time caller in Birmingham. Hello.
Hello, Sangita.
Now, I understand that you've just done a PhD about cyberflashing.
Yeah, so the PhD that we're just completing at the University of Birmingham is looking more broadly at something called image-based sexual abuse. So that would include sharing of intimate images without somebody's consent, or somebody has consented to share those images, or things like cyberflashing, or posting somebody's videos online and then using those as a way to coercively control somebody, as a way to blackmail somebody, extortion, all of those things. So it's broader than just cyberflashing, but it definitely covers aspects such as that.
So are you arguing that this is essentially broader than just the abuse of one person by another, but goes further into more organised criminality?
Yeah, I think that's definitely been the case. So our particular study has been an international one. So we've looked specifically at the LGBTQ population, individuals, because
Why
a lot
just
of the
that community?
Right, so a lot of the evidence that's kind of coming out around image-based sexual abuse more generally is highlighting that people from minority groups particularly are experiencing this type of behaviour disproportionately compared to white, cisgendered, heterosexual people. And we don't really understand why that's happening. So that was kind of the main focus for us to look at that population as part of the PhD. But more generally, with the research that's out there, there's definitely a bigger kind of building of the evidence around this type of crime. And you just mentioned, some changes to legislation, and new legislation that's had to come in as a way to try to protect individuals. And I think when you're looking at cyberflashing, particularly women, I think are experiencing that more disproportionately within this wider kind of kaleidoscope of this intimate image sharing and the behaviours perpetrated.
For sure. May I ask you something? Given your study, is it the University of Birmingham?
Yeah.
Yeah, my alma mater. You'll be glad to know.
Oh, thank you.
So, given your research has specialised in the LGBTQ plus community, can I ask you something about the reaction to the story around William Wragg? So we have William Wragg, a gay man. He's using the app Grindr. It's been variously described to me as a dating app / hookup app. That from my gay friends. But what I find very interesting is when I had just tweeted out a story about him, specifically about him, and the fact that he had been subsequently blackmailed, he says. What he then does is share contact details of his co-workers, staffers and journalists, which he now realises is wrong. I mean, I would say absolutely it's wrong and he should have really gone to the police. But I wondered whether there was a real bias in the way in which people failed to sympathise with him. And I'm going to be honest, maybe I'm wrong here, but I felt as though had he been a woman, he may have received more sympathy from the general public.
Without me kind of getting sucked into the kind of political element of this, there is an individual who has had or threats to share whatever those images were or whatever that information was that the person had, given that was given to that person consensually in the first instance, but then they've then tried to use that to sextort or extort somebody. The decisions that the individual's taken, they just happen to be a member of parliament, are questionable. But I think that when you look at the participants within our study and the levels that perpetrators go to to extort somebody, control somebody in every aspect of that individual's life, it can have quite a traumatic effect on that person for them to behave in particular ways. So if I look at our own study, 95% of our participants either thought about committing suicide or attempted suicide. A good many of them have got post-traumatic stress disorder. They have no online existence anymore. They do not go online. They stay away from online spaces. You think about the pandemic and what we've just gone through. We have all communicated using an electronic device, Teams and Microsoft and Zoom and all of the others. Having to put themselves in front of the camera for work was just the most traumatic thing that they were doing. And we were collecting a lot of data during COVID. I don't want to get drawn into the political aspect of that, but the harm...
It's not really the political aspect that I was drawing you into. It was more the fact that I felt that, maybe rightly or wrongly, that just on a human level, this is a man who shared an intimate picture of himself consensually, and then somebody decided to do something terrible, which is threaten to publish it.
Yeah.
And it was a terrible breach of trust. So what I was really, it's not the political I was asking about, it was like the human, really. And whether or not perhaps he was receiving a bit less sympathy because he was a man, to put it bluntly.
Well, I think that may be the case. We had female participants in our study as well who had also experienced image-based sexual abuse. Interestingly, when you looked at the female participants, there was a lot more coercive control. There was a lot more kind of domestic violence that was kind of involved with that. Whereas with the male participants, it tended to be sextortion. And actually, many of our male participants told us that they felt targeted in some way. They received emails saying, if you don't pay X amount of pounds, we'll do this. One of our participants, they tried to share all of these videos with all of their colleagues. They were a very, very senior person within the organisation that they worked in. Another male participant lost his job because he worked with children and was a social worker. This was not in the UK. So, the impact of this behaviour is so far-reaching. And I think it was interesting. I was listening to a caller yesterday when they were talking to James about this. And there is, within the gay community particularly, we have had these hookup apps for a lot longer, I think, when you compare that to, some of my heterosexual friends and them using things like Tinder, Bumble, etc. So I think some of this behaviour it's just become normalised in some way until, somebody's life starts to unpack in front of them. I don't think that we often think about that. So, yeah.
You do have sympathy for him for the fact, yes, he has been quite in a difficult situation, but you've got to remember he's in a particular position of trust. And maybe, as my mother would have said to me as well, you shouldn't have done it in the first place because you should have maybe thought about it a bit more, because as women, we all know the fact that, sharing images can lead to down a very difficult kind of rabbit hole. So he maybe should have thought a bit about that beforehand.
Yes, true.
And the fact that these pictures have gone out, he should have done the right thing and gone to his party first of all. So he's in a position of trust as an MP. And if he was prepared to do that so quickly to save his own soul, how can people trust him as their MP and trust him to do the right thing for everyone else? Because he's indicated he is weak. And whereas it's a terrible thing that's happened to him, but the thing is, he is in a position he should have stood up at the first point and gone and sought help for it and not succumb to the blackmail.
So I do agree with you that his first port of call should have been number one, the Whip's office, and number two, the police station. And I'm not quite sure, I'm going to be honest with you, Christine. I think you've just persuaded me. I think I'm changing my mind live on air.
Had this happened to me?
Have you? Well, what that chap said was that people become suicidal because they're so frightened.
And because there is this there is a very odd sort of double standard here.
What do you mean?
It happens. It's the same double standard that sort of crops up where you have people who are who will view pornography, but then actually would never accept the fact or that someone who is an adult performer is just someone who is doing a job, right? And if you're prepared to make use of their content, how dare you then not acknowledge and treat them as another human being doing a job, right? We have this idea that everyone should be prim, proper and perfect, irrespective of the actual practicalities and truth of how people live in their day-to-day lives. And when it comes to the standard to which we hold our public officials also have sex drives. They should always keep themselves within rules and laws and behave in an appropriate and legal fashion, clearly. So, that's what's happened here.
Well, that's interesting.
Apart from the blackmail.
So what Christine and Ayrshire was saying, and I think it was also a very good point. That's why I think this is a very interesting conversation, because it is so nuanced. What Christine and Ayrshire was saying was, look, I mean, she called me up and said, you got the wrong end of the stick here. That what distinguishes William Wragg, for example, from ordinary people is his position as an MP. And I also have sympathy with that view, right? Which is that, well, what we know, don't we, is that he would have been at the debates over the online safety bill, that there are procedures that he must follow, that we have to have MPs that have integrity, that if they are failing to use the whip's office or go to the police, what does that say about them as MPs in terms of their responsibility?
It says that they are products of a society that still uses shame, not just sort of holdover shame of internalized homophobia, which from a party that has people who voted in things like Section 28 and etc. is understandable, because there are still those what I would consider outdated views within the party somewhere. And it proves that actually MPs are also human beings. And as a society, we need to admit the fact that in 10 years' time, there will be more people who have sent images to other consenting adults than have not. And we need to actually catch up with the realities of this and what that means. We can't pretend that it isn't happening, and to basically try and say, well, he just shouldn't do something which is perfectly legal to be done, I think is unfair.